Hello, in this episode we're going to have a look at character creation part 2. So we're going to be focusing on the complex nested options for your character creation screen. So this is directly connected to the previous episode where I've basically created this character creation screen. So there's an overview and we're going to be focusing on how to control those options on the right hand side. So these ones over here. So for example, in my one, we can control things like race, gender, hairstyles, hair colors, and things like that, right? So that's what we're going to look at, how to build those options out, right? So we're not focusing on the skeletal meshes at this stage. We're going to do that in the next video. But don't underestimate this one. You know, it might seem like it's not a big deal, not a lot of work maybe, but it's actually quite a bit of work and quite a bit of setup. So potentially start small and look to expand that out because yeah, it's not an easy sort of chapter to do. But I'll include this link in the description, right? And it will basically go through step by step what kind of widgets you need to create, what kind of blueprints you need to set up and things like that. So do check that out. And what I'll do is I'll basically go into the overview of the blog post. So I'm not going to go into like literally step by step, maybe to some extent I will, but I want to give an overview of what it is that we're making and give a description of the flow of data. But this is essentially what we're making. It's going to be the character creation screen without the character at this stage. But what we'll have is these options for the character creation, right? So we can see we've got different races, different genders, different hair options. You can see the values are changing here, hair color, skin color, and things like that, right? So you can obviously modify the values to whatever you need them to be. But the idea is that we'll be able to also create these debug lines so you can see what's going on. So for example, when I change my gender, you can see multiple choices are being changed. So those are the nested options, right? Okay, so we'll probably begin with a customized character blueprint or widget. So that's the root one over here. So we'll be able to see all of the options there. So we'll get started with the constructor. So at the moment, I'm skipping the spawn character one. So by the way, I'm like in the game, I was referencing to a different blueprint. So that's why you didn't see the one spawn. So this one is actually spawning the character. We'll go through this particular piece in the next episode, but the ones that we'll focus on is getting the available options and rendering those options on the screen. So for example, get available races, get available genders and stuff like that, right? So let's get started with that. So this one is a blueprint. So if I go to character creation, help us create character options. So in order to create this one, I went into blueprints and blueprint function library, because ultimately it's just a static library where I have these functions, and all they do really is return me my options for the character creation screen. So for example, get me my available races. So I want to only have 2 races. So I've got this tag structure over here, which is going to be basically an array of tags. And the tag is a simple name and value string pair. So that's all I'm doing. I'm simply returning these options out. Okay, so it's super simple function, get available races, and I'm returning the name and value. And bear in mind, the name is going to be my sort of internal name that I'm going to be using for like as keys for my maps and stuff like that. Whereas the value refers to the human readable value. So I want to just reiterate, for example, this human here, you see it's with a capital H. It refers to this value over here. Okay, so if I go into get available genders, I pass in the race key. So note that the race key is gonna be the name from here. Okay, so you can see the name here. You can see it's small h. This one is a DK, probably easier to look at. So you can see that DK options are male and female. Now, the race key here was optional, so I only included it in case, you know, people might want to make a robot race or something, right? So you might have different genders there. And it's a lot easier to change it, you know, with this approach than if you had something else. But this is entirely optional. So you can also make this not take any parameters and just return male and female, right? Then if you go into get available hair meshes, this is now starting to follow the nested pattern, right? Because ultimately each one of these, you can see it's taking in a key, right? So all of them, all of them will take in a key. and it's a race and gender key, right? So all that is a structure. So if I go into character creation, helpers, models, and I created a race gender pair. So all it is a race gender string, okay? Nothing too interesting there, but it's pretty powerful, right? Because what that allows us to do is inside these hair meshes, define all of the different hair meshes available for the different races and genders. So for example, a human male should have these hair options, right? HM hair 1. So your styles can be the same. So for example, on the next one, human female, you can see the style names. So the user-facing names are the same. So style 1, style 2. But the internal name is actually going to be different, right? So that means when I'm deciding which asset to load from, I can control it dynamically using this approach, right? So that's what this is about. And I'm not going to be using any sort of string appending functions or anything like that, right? So they're all defined here. So this could mean a little bit of a more sort of setting up to do, right? But honestly, config is much easier to deal with than sort of dealing with many if statements and concats and stuff like that. So at least from my experience, right? Do comment if you've got other suggestions. So, and you can see that, for example, skin is also following the same approach. So you can see you've got the keys here for human and male, and then your values will be an array of available options, right? So here, for example, human male can have HM body 1 with style 1 through to 5, and you can see it's different keys for different styles. And you can see for undying, for DK, I've only got 3 options, right? So it's 3 completely different skin options, even though the skin mesh is actually going to be the same, okay? So that's how we define these things, and I think I even had, so basically at the moment, I haven't got different classes for different races, but it's obviously possible to set up those locked classes for different races over here as well, right? Entirely optional, so you can design it as you like, but you've got the power to do so using these sort of composite keys. Okay, so that's how we basically define those options, and we're going to be using them extensively inside of this blueprint. So you can see, for example, at the beginning, I get the available races, I get the available genders, and then I start generating that key. So again, for all of these options, I use this key. So that's why straight away I'm updating the gender race key. And all that's doing is getting the tag name for the current race and gender options, right? So this will be by default 0 at the start. So I'm just getting the 0th index for the race and gender. And I'm setting the local race gender key, okay? So that's what this is doing. And then I start calling all of the creators for the widget. Okay, so if I go into here, you can see that nothing is created by default. So all of the options are created dynamically. And that's what these guys are doing. So let's have a look. Create race as selection. So obviously the first option was my race. So what I do is I get my race option. I get the 0th index. So this one is called from the constructor, and it's only called once. So I get myself the 0th value of my race. So this is human readable value. And then I create my toggle widget, and I say that the title of this toggle widget is going to be race. And then the value is going to be the 0th index for the race option. I mean, I could have done this in a few different ways, but this is just one easy way of doing that. So I'll show you quickly what this toggle widget actually looks like. So this is a pretty cool widget, and if I go inside it, basically it's just a toggle widget, right? So you have 2 buttons on either side. So there's a left button and a right button, and there's 2 text blocks. So one of them is the title. So we just call the title race. It's not going to change. But then this value box will change. So every time you make modifications to your option, we should update this with a user-facing value. And the way we do that, so let's have a look into the blueprint. When we construct it, we basically say, okay, we've got the 2 variables, current value and the title. So we set the text box title to the title. And then we also have this update value custom event that will start calling from the parent widget, which basically will override the current value with whatever we want it to be. And then we call this function to then set that or propagate that value to the actual text box over here, right? So that's what that one does. Then we also have the two buttons. So these two buttons have the on-click events, and all they do is linked to the event dispatcher. So I basically created two event dispatchers called left click and right click. And what this means is that basically the parent component or the parent widget is going to be actually handling those clicks. Okay, so I didn't want to handle them inside this component. I wanted the parent to handle those clicks. So that's what we're doing. So if I go back here, we'll see them in action, right? So we've created the race widget. We're going to the scroll box options, and I'll show you that here. So this is the scroll box, and we basically say add it to the scroll box. So add that toggle widget inside the scroll box. And then once you've done that, using the race widget, so you can see it's here, bind the events to the left click and the right click. Okay, so what that means is when I create these two custom events, it means whenever I left click, it will execute this function, and whenever I right click, it will execute this function, right? So that's when I say that the parent component, the parent widget, will handle those on click events. So that's what we're doing here. So every time you click on them, what we want to do is toggle the options. So in this case, it's going to be the race options, right? So we have available race options, and what we want to do is increment or decrement, like basically change this race index either up or down, right? And we do that using this update index function. Now this looks kind of scary, you know. It's really actually quite simple. It's a circular index, right? So basically we either want to add one to it or subtract one, right? But anytime it's 0 and you subtract 1, we want it to go back to the length of the array. And every time it's at the length of the array and you're trying to add 1, we want to make it go back to 0, right? So it looks kind of big and scary, but really that's what it's doing. So don't be overwhelmed. If there's a better way of doing that, do let me know. Put it in the comments, because that would be great. As obviously, like, writing one of these is not ideal for something so simple, but that's just one way of doing it. And that's what we do from update index. So bear that in mind. When you left click, I don't increment, and when I right click, I increment. So that's the only real difference there. And then I update the race index and I resolve the changes. So when I resolve the changes, what that really means is that I get my tags array. So these are the available options. I get my my toggle widget, and I get my index. So I get the tag value. So there's two functions. One of them is called get tag name, and the other one is get tag value. So remember that I have an array of tags, and they have a name and value string pairs. So that's all they do. They basically look for the index. They get the value from the index, and then they either return the name or the value, right? So that's all they do. Nothing too sort of interesting, to be honest. And we were here, right? Get tag value, and then you apply it to the current value of the toggle widget, right? So if I go back to the toggle widget inside the graph, we have the current value there. So that's what we're basically doing, right? We get the we change the index of the option, we get the current value, and then we update the toggle widget with that current value, okay? And we also call the update value event, right? So the one that we looked at earlier. We also add a little bit of debugging just to make sure everything is working as expected. And we also update the gender race key in case we've modified the race or gender. So really, it doesn't have to sit with resolve changes. That could have sat with just so basically I can just add it over here on the race or the gender. But I've just added it there because it has no impact on anything else. So to be honest, yeah, it doesn't really matter which one you put it in. Okay, so that's basically looking at resolving race. So the next one that we'll look at is resolve gender. So bear in mind, the vast majority of the blueprints throughout now are actually going to be following the very same pattern, right? Because basically, let's have a look. When resolving gender, you want to do basically the same things, right? You want to evaluate what your gender options are. You get the 0th index for the gender options. You create the toggle widget and you populate the current value based on that 0th index. You add the widget to the scroll box, and then you connect the events on the left click and the right click. The left and the right click events are basically doing the very same thing of updating the index either up or down. So you obviously save that as well, and then you resolve the gender. So resolving gender just calls the bottom function over here, and we also want to check that the index is valid. Now this is only important on some of the options. It's probably less important on the gender because all of the available options have 2 options. But just to demonstrate, or I'll show you here, it just means that if your index is over a certain amount, basically it's larger than your current options, just reset it to 0. I'll give you an example here. So for males, I have 5 different style options, right? But for female, I have, let's say 7. Yeah, 7. So that means if I go back to male, I can't be on the 7th index. I need to reset that back to 0. So that's what this is basically doing, is if you're on an invalid option, just reset it back to 0. So that's what this is doing, check index is valid. And if it's not, reset it to 0. Okay, and then you resolve changes. So again, you just pass in the 3 values. So you will find this pattern across all of the blueprints, because all you're essentially doing is resolving the values over here and potentially updating the gender race key. Okay, but that's only relevant for either gender or the race. You'll also update all options going forward, or rather, you'll update all options for when you're modifying either the race or the gender, but you don't need to update all options if you're modifying hairstyle and things like that, because they have no nested components. And what this one actually does is basically resolves the hair mesh, hair color, skin, facial features, and resolves classes. Now we're going to look at update character appearance struct a bit later in the next episode, because that's more relevant to modifying the skeletal mesh. Okay, so these are the other options that we have available. Okay, so let's have a look at the next one, hair meshes. So this one will now follow a consistent flow, because the rest of the components are all sort of child components, right? So basically the other ones are root. So race and gender can have many different types of hair and stuff like that. But if you modify the hair, you're not going to modify anything else in that effect, right? So that's kind of the difference there. Okay, so when you're spawning the hair mesh widget, you first get the available options. You set those options up as a local variable. You get the tag value. So again, it's following the same sort of pattern, right? You can see that's here. You create your toggle widget, you give it a title, you set it as a local variable, you add it to the scroll box options as a child, and then you bind your left and right click events. Now on the left click, you update the index, so it's the same thing as on the right click, but this one's increment, the other one is subtracting, and then you resolve the hair mesh. So these ones are also updating the character appearance struct, so again we'll cover that in the next episode. But yeah, basically because they're sort of your leaf or the child components, they directly affect the appearance of your character, so that's why we have them here. But again, we'll cover that in the next episode. And yeah, so resolve hair mesh will basically take you over here, and what you want to do is confirm that the index is valid. So that's why you get the available hair meshes again, because you could be calling this after changing the your gender or something. So you're not necessarily calling it from here. You can be calling it from when you've changed your race or gender as well. So again, you want to be reconfirming that the index is valid based on the current selection that you have. So you've checked the index and then you resolve the changes. So resolve hair color, following the exact same pattern. The only real difference is instead of like, one of them is using hair mesh options, the other one is using hair material options, right? So your index is just different and your widget reference is different, but the pattern is effectively the same. So the only other difference, so the skin is also doing the same thing. The only difference was here, so this is an optional extra. If you want to handle null case scenarios, so when I resolve the facial features, I want to get my available options, but then I also checked, do I have any options there at all? Like, is it more than 0? If it is, then basically it stays visible, right? And then you process the rest of the changes. But if it's not got any more than 0, so if there's no data to display, then simply make it invisible, right? So I collapsed this feature and I don't resolve anything further. So that's the only other change that you'll have to do. But otherwise, that's basically it. Yeah, the classes is the same as the other ones. So that should get you to this stage, right? So you'll be able to then toggle between your different options. And in the next episode, we'll start applying those options onto a skeletal mesh so we can start rendering them on the screen. Okay, well, good luck and see you next time. Thanks.